Good morning, Sunnyvale. Hope everyone is doing well. We'll get started in just a moment, and hopefully you can hear me this week. Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me this morning. Can people hear me? Checked it earlier. Let's see what's going on. Can people hear me? Can people hear me? Yes, you can. Okay, so we're streaming this week. Yes. So welcome to my weekly virtual office hours. Welcome to winter. So yeah, earlier this week, of course, was the beginning of winter solstice. So the beginning of winter was officially on Wednesday afternoon, I think it was, yes. So ultimately the shortest day of the year, the longest evening of the year. So now the days will finally be getting longer on a week by week basis. So happy that we've got as little light during the day as possible now. So now the days are just going to get longer and longer and a lot more sun. So happy to see that. This week's early artwork is actually a mural from my holiday travels. So it's a bear that it's kind of an interesting depiction of a bear. But ultimately, I was able to get away for a few days, headed out early for Christmas break, although I'll be back early next week. So, ultimately not that long gone. But, it's been good to see, definitely after a long year, a break is definitely needed by your mayor. But happy to be here and happy to, for all the people that join us every week, whether or not you're watching it live or whether or not you're watching it days or even weeks later. Thank you for being here, of course. Let's go ahead and get rid of our background. Let's get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thank you for joining me again this week. Merry Christmas Eve. This is the 144th installment of my weekly office hours. Hope everyone is doing well, staying healthy and staying warm. We've now reached 1,012 days since the March 16, 2020 county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. Almost 3 years ago, I converted my weekly coffee shop office hours into these weekly live stream addresses, and I haven't Missed a week since, except of course, actually, I did miss 1 week for surgery on my shoulder, and my shoulder's doing a little bit better. People still say they appreciate hearing from their mayor each week, and these weekly addresses allow me to provide you some updates, some idea of what's coming up from the city standpoint, and answer some of your questions. So thanks for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale. Most Fridays I follow up these live stream sessions with in-person meetings at Bean Scene on Murphy Avenue. If you would ever like to meet, just email me and we can reserve a 15-minute or 30-minute time slot. And just it's always good, as for last week, thanks for everyone who reached out and texts and phone calls and chat messages that my sound wasn't working. I don't know if it was the drivers or Zoom, but definitely it was an issue. I don't, and shows that I normally don't pay attention to my phone or look at the chat messages until we finish this session. Just as a reminder, though, I did ultimately re-record last week's session later in the afternoon. So you can always see those, go back to the page and look at my videos. So if you go back to my Facebook page and click on videos, you can see all the videos I've posted, or you can actually go to YouTube and I post those weekly videos on YouTube also. So if you want to go back and look at last week's, if you have nothing to do this weekend, you can always go back and take a look. Let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last 2 weeks. 2 Sundays ago, I visited a group of residents who were making the Arches of Hope. And so these are the holiday arches, so basically PVC pipe with lights strung around them that you'll see along the sidewalks and in multiple areas downtown. I think they built over 350 of those arches, and it was great to help out a little bit, but to see all the community that's being built. So it was really a manufacturing effort of lots of people doing different things as far as stringing the lights around the PVC pipes, or connecting them, or double checking that all the lights were working. It was actually a really great affair as far as that's concerned. And so, yeah, if you get a chance, go to downtown, and I think most of them are near, McKinley Avenue, basically east of downtown, so east of the Whole Foods. So if you go down McKinley and head that way on Bayview and Central Avenue, you can see a good number of them, and it's on, I think, some on McKinley and some on Iowa, and just a mixture downtown. So drive around, walk around. It's actually really nice. It adds a lot of spirit. Definitely a lot of residents around the city of add a lot of holiday lights and decorations to their front lawns, but hope that those Arches of Hope have really added a lot. And they were created, first under COVID, so people wanting to just kind of create a more festive downtown. And now it's a community, it's a community project to a large degree, and partially funded by a grant from the city. So that's always a fantastic thing when the city can, residents come together, put an application together, and come up with different projects as far as that's concerned. Last Tuesday was our final council meeting of the year. And so it was the main portion of it was around our budget. So we received our comprehensive budget analysis for the fiscal year. So it takes several months to finalize, all the bills for the fiscal year that ends on June 30th. And then we, have the auditors go through the books and create a comprehensive report. And then when it comes to council, we approve those year-end budget modifications for the additional revenue, hopefully, that we have left over. And yet again, this year we had about 13 million in revenue left over from last year's budget. So we do, conservative budget, from a budgetary standpoint, from city charter, we need to have a 10-year balanced budget. And from a process standpoint, we have a 20-year plan. And so ultimately, you know, we try to be relatively conservative from a budgetary standpoint. You never know what might happen during the year. So from our 13 million that we had extra left over from last year, and a lot of that came from several sources, one of which was property taxes was about $1 million, just over $1 million higher than what we expected. Sales tax was about 5 million, which is positive for us. And transient occupancy tax was about $2 million above what we estimated. And so ultimately business travel has resumed to some degree within the city. And then as far as how we spent that 13 million, we spent some of it, about $50,000, towards an ADA transition plan. So doing more curb cuts along the sidewalks in the city. We put $2 million in grant matching funds for transportation, sustainability, other supported grants. And we actually set aside $500,000 for grant writing assistance, so that we actually have staff to write those grants, so that we can get state grants or federal grants or regional grants that then we can basically have that matching funds for. So all that's actually very good. We don't want to fund all the work from the city by ourselves, and wherever we have an opportunity to get additional funding, it's always positive. Ultimately, we also had $100,000 for additional power washing of the downtown. Ultimately, we hear lots of complaints about the crows and what are we going to be doing about the crows. Ultimately, that's one of the things that we can do. Definitely, there are already park staff downtown again, using the green lasers to hopefully harass the crows, but we still need to clean up after what the mess that they're leaving. So we added additional funding for power washing. We put $2.5 million into our pension trust, which ultimately helps us reduce the overall pension issues. We have like a peak from our retirement liability. We have a peak in about 2028, 2029, according to the actuarial tables. And so that helps defer that hit from budgetary standpoint. But the biggest remainder was 5.5 million, which we actually put into the general fund budget stabilization. That fund is there in case there's a downturn, in case there's a recession, in case there are things that we did not evaluate that we would have to deal with. And so that's one of the things that kind of helped us through the last few years, that and federal, a certain amount of federal funding, but ultimately, it's making sure it's saving for that rainy day, because you never know what those issues are going to be. And then we also adopted an urgency ordinance regarding some of our zoning. So from a state standpoint, the legislators passed and the governor signed lots of different zoning related items on accessory dwelling units, on parking minimums, on large family child care. And what we have to do is, before that goes into place, those new laws go into place on January 1st, what we actually have to do is make sure that we update our ordinances so there's no discrepancy between the two. And so from an ADU standpoint, we increase the height from 16 or 18 feet as opposed to what the old code was, when it's depending on how close it is to a high quality transit corridor. And then we remove parking minimums if it was near a half mile of a major transit stop. And a major transit stop is the Sunnyvale Caltrain station, the 8 VTA light rail stops, and ultimately that's the biggest major transit stops that we have in the city. And then last Wednesday, on a little lighter note, Smart Asset declared the Sunnyvale as the happiest city in the United States. And so, they analyzed the 200 largest cities and found that looking at the metrics of safety, income, education, and marriage, ultimately Sunnyvale ended up on top. So, kudos to us. it's always great to be, the mayor when you're getting these major awards. And so being the happiest city, and actually there were a good number of California cities in the top 10. Fremont was there. I think San Jose was there also, but Sunnyvale was number one. So kudos to everyone, and thanks for making it a great city. And then last Wednesday evening, we had the Sunnyvale Sustainability Speaker Series, our last one for 2022. And ultimately, this one was on sustainable food gardening in your own backyard. And so Trinity Tomsick, an executive director of Garden Table Silicon Valley, explained, different tricks of the trade for saving water and delivering different types of food in your garden. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, that is available online. So you can go ahead and take a look for sustainability series on the city website, and that will point you to that video. I think it's also on our YouTube channel, but definitely take a look when you get a chance. And then, as you start planning, especially for the spring and summer planting, as far as your gardens are concerned. And then last Thursday, the Biden administration announced the plan to deal with the increased kind of COVID number of cases that we're seeing. And so Americans now can order 4 more COVID-19 tests through the mail. So the USPS will directly deliver that. You just need to go to covidtests.gov, and you can put in your address, and that'll automatically be delivered to you. Tests are also available through your pharmacies, community testing sites, food banks. People covered by private health care, our private insurance plans can get fully free reimbursed for, 8 tests per month. So all that's positive, for those that are going out and looking at, gathering, lots of holiday gatherings right now. Make sure you test if you think you've been exposed. And then last Thursday night, football, I don't normally talk about football, but the 49ers beat Seattle, and that made them the NFC champions. So now we're going into playoffs. So ultimately, good to see the 49ers, a local team, always succeeding. Last Saturday was the Tetra Hotel's last free holiday event. So they've been doing that for the last 4 Saturdays, giving out complimentary holiday treats, cider, hot chocolate, s'mores. But it was really nice, outdoor music, a life-size snow globe, games for the kids, and even a drag queen Mrs. Claus. But last Saturday was also the ugly sweater contest, so it was good to get in the holiday spirit. I attended at least twice. I think twice over the month. But it was good to see the hotel giving back and bringing people together. Lots of different families and that I heard attended throughout the month. So glad that that's happening. And then Sunday morning, of course, was the World Cup final. Congratulations to Argentina, who was the big winner. And there's been lots of talk about World Cup this week, of course, because the 2026 World Cup is, just around the corner, and one of the locations will be at Levi Stadium. So there'll be, 2 locations for the North American World Cup, 2 locations in Canada, 11 in the US, and 3 in Mexico. And so I was at an event at Levi Stadium just 2 weeks ago, and they're already deep into planning for what those events are going to be around the Bay Area, and ultimately the number of teams is going from 32 teams to 48 teams. So there will be a lot more teams playing, and we're not really sure what that's going to look like from a Bay Area standpoint yet. But keep our fingers crossed. I think it's going to be over multiple weeks, almost a month, as opposed to just basically kind of 2 weeks locally, and then some localized, the big location for the semifinals and finals. And last Sunday, of course, I mentioned it last week, there was a an exhibit at the Sunnyvale Library, Darshana, a glimpse into the Hindu civilization. And so lots of residents went there. And I saw that earlier this year at one of the Diwali events, and happy that the library was able to bring that there. Monday, of course, was the beginning of Hanukkah. Hag Samayag for those that are celebrating. This is that holiday season. So lots of different, depending upon what your beliefs are, lots of different celebrations going on. So I know that there were some menorah lightings in Sunnyvale earlier this week that I wasn't able to attend, but good to see everyone out and celebrating. This week has been relatively slow, although Sunnyvale has been in the news because of the District 3 election. That continues to get news. Ultimately, they're doing additional recounts. So I heard late yesterday that after re-examining and opening some late ballots, or some ballots that they thought were actually under the deadline, it might have actually ended up in a tie. So I haven't heard anything official yet. So trying to figure out what's happening following that election closely. So that's our last election, our last district, the district election that needs to be finalized. And then, of course, our early Wednesday morning, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake shook Northern California, and that was near Eureka, near Humboldt. 2 people died, and thousands were out without power, and you actually had to boil their water because their water was conceivably unsafe. So it's actually, a great reminder that everyone should be prepared for that natural disaster, especially an earthquake that could happen in our area anytime. So, please consider attending. And I posted earlier this week, but consider attending the 2.5 hour personal emergency preparedness class. And it's either one in English or Spanish. So that PEP class, personal emergency preparedness, is only 2.5 hours. And make sure that you are prepared, you and your family are prepared, depending on how big your family is. The next one is actually not that far away. It's on January 8th. And that's the English speaking one. And then on January 28th, there'll be a Spanish speaking one. And then if you really want to get prepared, there's an 8-week, and it's 8 weeks of 1 night a week CERT, and that's our Community Emergency Response Team. And that basic course, it starts in March. So, I went through it before I got on council, and it's a great team. It's managed by our public safety department, as well as a great group of CERT volunteers. But that better prepares you not just how to be prepared for yourself, but it gives you some tools. It gives you some basic first aid. It also creates a position of kind of a neighborhood lead, so that in case when that next disaster happens, and people are looking for someone to take the lead, because from a city standpoint, we can't be everywhere in our city all at once, but what we can do is make sure that we have certain people in neighborhoods. And we have several classes a year go through that CERT training. And when that next disaster happens, they'll be there to, making sure everyone is on, working together in the neighborhood, doing some initial first aid conceivably, and then also just managing that effort at a local level, and then reporting to public safety. So, happy that we have that program and ready for that disaster when that occurs. Ultimately, that next class begins in March, goes until I think begins mid-March, ends in mid-May. And so always happy to attend at least one or two of those courses from a mayor standpoint. Starting today, the Sunnyvale Library will be closed. A lot of the public, city offices will be closed through the day after Christmas. So everything will be reopening on Tuesday. And it's for staff to enjoy some time with their families, ultimately because Christmas landed on a Sunday. we normally give staff Christmas Day and Christmas Eve, and because Christmas Eve is on a Saturday, Christmas Day is on a Sunday, we extended that weekend to give them more time with their families. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly COVID numbers. The COVID numbers across the nation have stabilized slightly, but with all the holiday events about to happen, with people, seeing relatives and traveling, there's a big expectation that the first week of January, middle of January, things will be peaking once again. Hospitalizations have continued to trend upward because of COVID, RSV, flu. From a national standpoint, we now have had 100.2 million cases. So we finally passed that 100 million case count. That increased about 500,000 in the last week. And then nationally, we've had 225 million, more than 2/3 of our population fully vaccinated. About 50% have received their booster, and more than 84% of those 5 and older have at least had one dose. 78% of adults are fully vaccinated, and at least 80% of all ages have received at least one shot. So that shot reduces the risk of hospitalization, which is really important. We still have people passing away with COVID. We've had another 3,000 in the last week, so we've now passed 1,086,000 people that passed away related to COVID. From a California standpoint, that surge has also stabilized a little bit. We now have had 10,830,000 positive cases. We continue to see a relatively high daily average of 7,400 people that are testing positive with COVID. That's down slightly from 8,600 a day a week ago. So 7,400 a day. Now it's 8,600 a day. It was 7,800 2 weeks ago, only 5,000 3 weeks ago. So ultimately, lots of people still getting COVID. We've now reached about a 10% average of test case positivity over the last 8 weeks. So basically 1 in 10 people getting tested is also positive with COVID. And then from California has now had additional 200 deaths. That brings our total to over 97,000 fatalities related to COVID. For the county, the cumulative case count has now passed 461,000. That's only up about 3,000 in the last week. That's the same week over week, or less than 5,000 that we had 2 weeks ago. And we've had additional 5 deaths. We're at now 2,548 deaths. But vaccinations, we're still looking good. 95% of those 18 and over are fully vaccinated. 75% of those that are eligible for the booster have at least received one booster. I continue to spend lots of time advocating on our city's behalf, talking to county health, talking to our county supervisors. Ultimately, if you want to get tested, you can go to scfreetest.org. If you want to get vaccinated, you can go to scfreevax.org. Locally, you actually can go to the Mayview Health Center if you need a COVID booster, and that's at the Columbia Neighborhood Center, and they're giving away those boosters or your first shot if you haven't got your first shot, Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. So definitely just drop by there. Let's go ahead and announce some upcoming events. Christmas is of course Sunday. So hopefully Santa brings you everything that you want this year. Hope everyone is enjoying this break and some time with the family. This is the time of the year when people reconnect with family, reconnect. It's not been another easy year. It's been difficult for some, but hopefully, you get a break, get some time to reflect on the past year. Next week should be fairly slow. As far as upcoming council meetings, our next council meeting is January 3rd. We get to say goodbye to some of our outgoing council members. So, council member Glenn Hendricks, our former mayor, and council member Larson, both have served 9 years on council. So we'll be saying goodbye to them. And then Tony Spitaleri, who was appointed earlier this year to finish the empty seat when after Mason Fong resigned from council. He finished, so he will also be saying goodbye to him. And he served, on the council previously for 8 years. And then we'll also be swearing in our new district council members that night. There'll be lots of speeches, certificates passed out. We'll also be choosing later in the evening. We'll actually get some work done. We'll choose our new vice mayor for a 1-year term. Council will also choose our intergovernmental responsibilities. So our IGRs, intergovernmental responsibilities, it's the regional boards that we serve on to represent Sunnyvale. And then we'll also be choosing our seating on the dais. We'll be back in person. And so that's, one of the things of where we sit on the dais is one of the things that the council chooses every year. And then the following week on January 10th, we'll have the ceremonial swearing in of the vice mayor. We'll approve the preferred concept plan for the community center grounds renovation project. So that outreach had been happening over the last year. So what we do with the ponds and that whole area is something to be looked at. And then we'll actually be looking at zoning amendment request regarding block 20. So that's the building at the corner of Matilda and Olive. And it's looking to allow additional residential units and office square footage. So that'll be one of the things that council will be undertaking that evening on the 10th. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. If you have a question, just add it to the chat, and ultimately I'll get to it if possible. I had lots of questions about different small businesses that I've been highlighting all week. People are always surprised about the variety of small businesses we have in Sunnyvale. And, shopping locally, it helps our, local small businesses, often family run, but it also, keeps those tax dollars, those sales tax dollars right in our community. So definitely whenever you can, take a look at shopping local. So I highlighted, I think 4 or 5 of the places, of the businesses this week. I'll be highlighting some restaurants. You still have plenty of time to shop local and not have to deal with shipping delays or anything of that nature. So definitely look at that. Look at gift cards at some of our restaurants. I'll be highlighting that later today. But shopping local is always just great for Sunnyvale. Let me get to some of those questions that I received ahead of time. Margaret asked, if District 3 ends up in a tie, then what happens? So if it ends up in a tie, the city clerk will then facilitate a public process to receive the tie or resolve that tie ballot or that tie by lot. And so both candidates will be invited to participate in the process. Richmond just went through that. So Richmond actually had a tie for one of their districts. Each council member put their name on a sheet of paper, put it in matching envelopes, and then put it into a bag. It was drawn out. And then that council member whose letter was drawn, that envelope was drawn, was the elected council member. And so that would be we would go through a similar process as far as that's concerned. So that's how we would break ties. Ying asked, why doesn't Sunnyvale have an ice rink this year? So the ice rink was actually sponsored and managed by CityLine. So CityLine Sunnyvale, that downtown mall developer. Because of all the construction happening downtown, they decided not to have it this year. It was some issues of logistics. Several of the parking lots are being taken over with construction vehicles and staging equipment and all that. So not really that easy, but they do plan to bring it back next year with conceivably at a different site. Ultimately, there's plans to bring it to Redwood Square, and so that's one of the things that they conceivably might be working on. But definitely, it was great. It was great to have that event, that outdoor event downtown for the last few years. Kathleen asked, can the city sponsor a much larger ice rink? set up in one of the huge city parks rather than the corporations having a tiny ice rink, profiteering that setup. So it would be costly. I think it cost over $100,000 to sponsor the ice rink downtown. And over the last few years, so $100,000 a year. It was it was great. It was also a reason to get people to come downtown to shop. Lots of parking there. Having it at one of the parks conceivably has issues that if there's a lot of people there, where do people park? There's limited parking around, that's around the parks. That's one of the things that we have is parks kind of spread throughout the city. And so that's another reason why to have it downtown. But yeah, once Redwood Square opens, there will be the possibility of actually having a larger ice rink than what was there last year. So hopefully we will see that downtown. Morgan asked, Sunnyvale resident here, I'd like to know if the town is doing anything about the infestation of crows. We cannot eat downtown without fearing our meals will have bird dropping. So, the city has restarted the use of green lasers to harass the crows away from the trees downtown, kind of getting them to spread out around the city. Council also approved, as I mentioned earlier, budget modification for spray washing the sidewalks and streets a lot more often. Ultimately, we are seeing some of the crows come back, but we'll see if the parks staff can scare them away again. It did an okay job last winter, so hopefully we can keep them away faster and earlier this year. Hoy asked previously, is Sunnyvale's minimum wage the highest in the country? How is small business and businesses managing that increase? So Sunnyvale is going to $17.95 on January 1st. Mountain View is actually going to $18.15, and Palo Alto is going to $17.25. I'm always shocked that we still see multiple cities that are just following the state minimum, and the state minimum is $15 right now, going to $15.50 on January 1st, but cities like Campbell, Los Gatos, Saratoga, which I think should be also leading the way, should be higher than the state minimum. But Sunnyvale, Mountain View, when there was a big effort in 2013, 2014 to push the minimum wage higher in Silicon Valley, that was one of the things our two cities took the lead. Right now for 2022, Sunnyvale and Mountain View are $17.10, but it's not the highest. Emeryville is at $17.67. Seattle is at $17.27. Palo Alto is currently at $16.45, so we're slightly higher. But all those go up year over year based upon some portion of CPI. So Sunnyvale and Mountain View both go up over CPI, but we put a maximum of 5%. So that's why we have a difference now between Mountain View and Sunnyvale. And the federal minimum wage still stands at $7.25 and hasn't actually increased since 2009. Let's see, I think that's all the questions that I got ahead of time. Let's see if I have any other questions. Let's see. How do we request a public bathroom to be built or installed at Victory Park? Garrick asked. So you could basically put a request into the city manager, say that you would like to see that, and then it would conceivably, if he agrees in public and city staff would then ultimately put it as a project for an upcoming year. And this is one of the things that we do. We have a 20-year plan for all of our infrastructure. So one of the things that we're doing is doing a renovation of all of our parks over 20 years. So we set aside $200 million over 20 years of park dedication funds and city funds to make sure that All of our parks are renovated. So our last park renovated was Fair Oaks Park. Our next park to be renovated is Lakewood Park. Sometimes it's tied to those renovations or tied to adding additional features like a bathroom. So that would be a request to send to the city manager. And Garrick also asked, how do we apply to run for vice mayor? So vice mayor is actually by city charter, is chosen by the council by one of the council members, so one of the district council members, now that we have districts. So the mayor is elected for a 4-year term. The vice mayor is selected by council on a yearly basis. It's usually the most senior person who hasn't done it before, not always, but that's how that process normally goes around. So on the first meeting in January, council goes through and chooses their vice mayor for that 1-year term. So they kept 7 council members, basically propose one or two or multiple people that might want to be vice mayor, and then council votes on it until one of them is selected. I think that is all the questions that I see, although I'm not seeing all the questions again. Issues with yet again, issues with Facebook. I only see about 5 of the questions that are available. Tells me there's more. Anyway, if there's more questions, I'll get to them next week. Let me go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again during this holiday week. We are still in uncertain times. New issues come up all the time, whether or not it's COVID related or something else. But I want you to know that no matter what the challenges we face them together. I'm proud of Sunnyvale and how our residents have responded to the challenges over the last 3 years. And I'm thankful to everyone who does good in our community, that helps out, that shows their generosity, shows their kindness. Your actions and your attitude really do make a difference. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Have a merry and safe Christmas. See you next week. Goodbye.